Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlsen, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best. Here on Telesur. Our guest today has come to the studio literally from the end of the earth. Moira Millan is a weichafe, or defender of the Mapuche people. She lives and works in Patagonia, at the southern tip of Argentina and Chile. Hers is a territory of vast expanses of land and some of the most beautiful scenery on earth. But that land and the indigenous peoples who live there are threatened today. Moira, thanks so much for being with us today on Interviews from Mexico.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Moira, I wanted to begin with the fact that in Argentina and in much of the world, there's an impression that there are no more indigenous peoples in Argentina and that practically you don't exist. Let's start by setting the record straight on that. Tell us about the indigenous peoples today in Argentina.
Well, Argentina has always tried to be present a Eurocentric image of itself as the Europe of South America. And for centuries, since the creation of the Argentine state until today, they followed a policy not only of extermination and genocide, but also later a policy of denial. The truth is that there are 36 indigenous nations in Argentina, and that the Mapuche nation is in a location that has geopolitical importance. We're engaged in an important struggle to defend life and territory.
What are some of the principal challenges that your people are facing in Argentina today?
The Mapuche nation is struggling with a lot of difficulties for rights and liberties because we have a racist government, a fascist government, has made hate into the state policy. And they are investing people resources in the repression and death of our peoples. So in fact, it's very difficult to demand the rights and liberties that we have had already gained. And now, unfortunately, we're seeing some serious setbacks.
Let's talk about one of the specific battles that affects you directly. You live in Chubut, where there's a plan to create a hydroelectric project that would literally flood out your village. What are you doing to respond to that, and is the threat imminent?
They've announced a dam mega project consisting of 6 dams in total in an area of 100,000 hectares. This place is like paradise on earth, and it's really sad. Our community where I live, would end up under 70 meters of water. We're starting a campaign to defend the river. We're working with slogans like "Not another river murdered," organizing different types of meetings to create a coalition between the various sectors that defend the life of rivers. And we're looking into the possibility of filing for an injunction from the court. But, well, the justice system is heavily influenced by the executive, so we don't have a lot of faith in the state's legal apparatus.
You mentioned the phrase, a murdered river. How do you conceive of the life of a river within the cosmology of the Mapuche people?
When Mapuche women talk about territorial bodies, we understand that our bodies, our territories, are extensions of our bodies. The Mapuche people believe that there isn't an anthropocentric vision, which posits that humans are above all of other species, above other Punewen, the first of nature. The river is very important, just like the forest, the animals, and the human beings. So we think it's insane that they are murdering nature for the benefit of the humans, and just an elite group of humans. Every element of our culture is associated with each element of nature. If they kill the rivers, if they silence their voices, they are also silencing the voice of the Mapuche people. As young children, we begin to sing the holy songs. I learned the holy song of the river when I was very little. If they murder the river, if they silence it, the song will also disappear.
You're also a founder of the March of Women of the Original Peoples, a nationwide organization of Indigenous women. How did you become an Indigenous activist?
Well, in reality, I think that I had this unwillingness to conform since I was born, because I was born a woman, I was born Indigenous and poor. I saw that there was a very difficult situation of oppression against my mother, my grandmother, women whose territories were stolen from them, who suffered abuse, who were reduced to states of virtual serfdom. These stories established themselves in my heart, in my soul, and I decided that I wanted to offer my life to change this reality, a reality that unfortunately still hasn't changed in Argentina. But it seems like there are more and more possibilities to create unity among women who are sick and tired of the humiliation, the contempt, the racism. And we believe that we have enough wisdom and memory to remake a country where living well is a right for all people. Indigenous women have a lot to offer on this revolutionary road.
So the purpose of the organization is to create a context of living well, as the English translation of buen vivir. What are the activities that you're carrying out toward that goal?
First of all, to define living well, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what we're referring to with that idea. For us, living well is recovering a kind of reciprocity between different peoples and with nature. The first step on this road towards reconstruction of reciprocity is the recognition that we exist, that we are here, that we are pre-existing nations, and we're making a lot of progress in that area. We're also taking back territory because, unfortunately, in the case of the Mapuche people, we live in a paradise that tempts large companies and famous multimillionaires to extend their tentacles into our land, to extract natural resources. And for personal ambition, like those of large landowners. So, living well implies taking back those sacred places which are now behind fences. There are multimillionaires like Ted Turner, like Sylvester Stallone, like Benetton, who think they own the mountains, the rivers and the lakes, and we think that they only own fences. But those mountains, rivers, and lakes are part of the framework for living well for everyone.
Tell us a little bit more about that dynamic. How did these multimillionaires from throughout the world end up in Patagonia, and what's their role in the conflicts that are taking place?
Well, a lot of them started arriving in the 1990s, that decade, when there was also a neoliberal government, like now, that made it possible for these investors, as they call themselves, to come in. They basically auctioned off Patagonia for a ridiculously small amount of money. The cost of taking over thousands and thousands of acres of land was minimal. And we've gotten to the insane point where an Italian company like Benetton owns almost a million hectares.
So they were buying government land?
They were buying lands that in reality belonged to the Mapuche communities, but that we didn't have papers for, the papers that prove that it's her property. But we had been in those places for centuries. So the state didn't recognize her presence, and they sold the lands with us inside them. That's what really happened. So these men don't have perfect property rights over our territories, but rather there was a series of irregularities in the process through which they bought the properties. That's why today we are taking down the fences around those territories, recuperating the land, and there are no court orders trying to get rid of us. What we're facing is a repressive policy to exhaust us and get us to leave. With that, I want to explain that the state has to admit that it's responsible for this, that they committed crimes when they handed out these property titles.
The reaction of the state then has been to respond with a policy of permanently harassing the settlements that are recuperating the land that was sold by the state itself. Is that correct?
Exactly. The Mapuche nation talks about recovering territory rather than occupying territory, because we're taking back territory that we've been part of for millennia. In the Mapuche cosmos, the idea of private property doesn't exist. The most important element of our concept, of our way of living in this world, is the sacredness of life. So we return to our territory, and when we return, generally, we choose the recoveries strategically. They are places that are by mining mega projects, by fracking, by dams. They are places where we know that if we aren't able to achieve territorial control as the Mapuche people, as people of the land, they are going to be sacrifice zones. In fact, that's what they call them, sacrifice zones. Places that are going to be murdered, destroyed through economic speculation by the elite that governs the world.
Sacrifice zones is the official name that they're giving this? How does it affect your people that this struggle is taking place in two different countries, Argentina and Chile?
The Mapuche nation is one nation. Our territory is called Wallmapu. It extended from the Pacific to the Atlantic. The Andes range wasn't a border, but a bridge of unity between Mapu, which today is under Chile's administration, and Mapu, which is today governed by Argentina. The governments cooperate with each other to repress us. The repression consists not only of militarizing our communities, repressing us with bullets, killing our young people, jailing our traditional authorities. We have hundreds of political prisoners, men and women. But also, the repression consists of smear campaign in the media. They use all of the hegemonic right-wing media outlets that demonize the image of the Mapuche people, justifying the butchery and persecution as if we were terrorists. And in fact, we are described as terrorists. So the border has been completely fortified, and it's gotten very dangerous. There are many people in Chile, in the Goluche side, who have their families on the Puelche side, which is in Argentina. And the same thing happens with the Mapuche brothers and sisters on the Chilean side, who have their families on the Argentine side. Now, to cross the way we used to, it's very difficult. There's a lot of controls. For example, if we go to buy medicine, they take our medicine at the border. Now, many of us can't cross to the Chilean side. They deport us back to the Argentine side.
To see your own families. You know, Moira, you're breaking a lot of stereotypes that people might have about what's happening in the Patagonia. And one of those is that these large investments have to do with conservation. And yet you've mentioned fracking, you've mentioned intensive mining and hydroelectric projects. What's the relationship there? Are they for conservation, or are they for this type of destructive development?
There are two interesting issues to analyze here. First, the fact that the Patagonia has a lot of water, fresh water. Even in the desert areas, there have been discovered that there is a significant, huge underground aquifer. They say it's the third largest in the world. Also, the ice fields, we have glaciers there. And the mining companies need large quantities of water, just like fracking, to be able to operate. On the other hand, the large estates represent another kind of threats that has to do with the fact that there are areas that are not going to be sacrifice zones, but are going to be conservation zones. That's where the supposed investment for the preservation of nature comes in. And they're going to be a kind of transmodern feudal lords, so to speak. Then, when the planet starts to collapse because of climate change, they are going to have a part of the planet where they'll be able to go, where they still have fresh water. There will still be forests, so those feudal lords are going to have the power of life and death over humans, who they allow to come into their estates.
So we're talking about a survival plan for the super rich in Patagonia.
Exactly, something like that. So some regions will be zoned to be part of this outrageous feudal project for the rich and famous. And then there will be other zones that are going to be sacrificed to continue feeding the voracious capitalism that is killing the planet.
In this dynamic, what's the role of the governments in terms of how they're responding to protect what should be their own natural resources?
The government's role has been completely complicit in these actions, which are really part of the corporate rule. The governments have been puppets, I could almost say hitmen, at the service of these large transnational that operate in Patagonia all across Argentina.
You were here in Mexico to attend the first international gathering of women who organize that was held in Zapatista territory. At that gathering, there were thousands of women who came from throughout the world, including a large number of indigenous women. Did you find that your people are facing some of the same threats as indigenous women in other parts of the world?
I had the good fortune to participate in the Zapatista gathering, the international gathering of women who struggle, and it was wonderful to be able to meet with women from all over the world who are taking part in key movements to preserve life, and also to understand how the transnational corporations and the world governments are carrying out a systematic strategic plan against life and territories and against the peoples. It was very useful for me to listen to the sisters and try to understand what's happening in other parts of the world, because now the Argentine government, led by Mauricio Macri, wants to import this as models to use against us in southern Argentina and across the country. I think that there is a large laboratory of terror that overlaps with democracies, with democratic governments, but there are really terrorist states that receive a packet of policies that include strategies they have to implement to neutralize this grassroots resistance. It was a very interesting experience. There were many lessons, a lot of teaching and learning by just listening to the sisters.
You faced the problem of being isolated in your struggles, and there's really very little information, accurate information, that has come out about the Patagonia. Do you think that there's a possibility of creating more linkages among people who are facing the same kinds of threats, so that these battles can be more broadly known and understood?
Definitely, yes. I think that it is possible to break the geographic walls that exist because we're dispersed geographically, and to break the media walls that demonizes and spread disinformation. I think that the social media helps a lot, and these gatherings, like the one the Zapatista sisters organized, help too. They allow us to tell the truth about what's really happening outside our territories too. And I think that it is vitally important and necessary and possible to create a global network of peoples who are struggling for life. Because now we understand that what we are experiencing locally is connected to these global policies. So we have to see how we are going to connect with each other to create strategies that will help us succeed together. It's also important to point out that we weren't always losing. There are struggles that we have won. And if we're mapping all this resistance, in addition to the pain of hardships we've felt as people, we also have reason to be happy, because the struggles we've won. And sometimes, of course, our enemies don't want us to remember that part.
What are some of the next steps for your movement in defense of land and territory and water in the Patagonia, Argentina?
With the Indigenous Women's March, we are planning the creation of an Indigenous Women's Parliament on April 21st and 22nd of this year. And then in October, we have a big gathering, around 60,000 or 80,000 women who are coming to this meeting that's held every year in Argentina. But this is the first time that we as Indigenous women are proposing, through the voice of the Mapuche women who are hosting the gathering, we're going to propose that the gathering be a plurinational gathering of women, and through that we hope to show that the parts of Argentina that deny our existence, that indigenous peoples are here and raise our political demands. Most important, for self-determination.
In Argentina, there's no recognition within the Constitution like there is now in many other countries, including in a very limited way here in Mexico, of the plurinational character of the country at all?
Not explicitly like that. Article 75 of the Constitution does recognize the existence, or rather the pre-existence, of indigenous peoples. That is, it recognizes that we're here before the nation-state invaded. But there's no recognition of the current situation, no recognition that there are plurinational territories, and that we are putting a country or a state on top of these territories. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. They only recognize the pre-existence that we were there before the creation of the state. So it's a difficult issue that we need to work on, and we're going to do that in different ways, not just reflecting, producing historical and intellectual material for reflection, but also taking down fences, recovering territories, confronting the mining companies, the petroleum companies, the dams, because we believe that there's no time to waste. The planet won't get another chance. The time to defend life is now.
Moira Millan, thanks so much for being with us here on Interviews from Mexico and talking about this critical issue. And thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week on Interviews from Mexico.